Good day, everybody. I hope that you are well, and I also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today, we'll be doing our grade 5 English lesson on adjectives and adverbs. And before we start, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. Once you've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of English Language Arts. We're doing grade 5. And then we're going to scroll down up until we get to the chapter of adjectives and adverbs. All right, so our chapter is adjectives and adverbs. Our subject is English language arts. We're doing grade 5. And the lessons that we are going to be focusing on under the chapter of adjectives and adverbs, we're going to choose between adjectives and adverbs. And we're going to say, is the word an adjective or an adverb? So is the word an adjective or an adverb? All right. So when it comes to an adjective, right? An adjective, it is a word that tells you about a noun. We can either say describes a noun. Sometimes we can say it can modify a noun. but it tells us more about a noun. And adjectives, they tell us often what kind, or adjectives they tell us how many. So adjectives, they often tell us what kind, or they can tell us how many. And if we look at the examples of adjectives, right? Remember, an adjective is a word, it tells us about a noun, it describes the noun. Basically, it tells us about a person, an animal, a place, or a thing. And it can either tell us what kind of person, what kind of animal, what kind of place, what kind of thing, or how many people, how many animals, how many places, how many things, right? And if we look at an example, it says the apples were delicious. So the apples were delicious. So if we were to look at or identify our adjective, then it basically tells us that the apples, or the adjective, it tells us what kind of apples they were. So what kind of apples? It was delicious apples. So delicious is our is the word that basically tells us about the noun, which is it tells us about the apples. What kind of apples? It was delicious apples. Or if you can even say I ate a red apple, then red tells us what kind of apple it is. It was a red apple. And if we were even to identify how many, then we can even say I ate two apples. So two, or let's say two is the word that tells us how many apples I ate, right? So the adjective, it basically tells us what kind of noun it is, or how many of that nouns it is. And then we have an adverb. And an adverb, it is a word that tells you about the verb, or it tells us about an adjective, or it just tells us about another adverb. So an adverb is a word that tells you about a verb, or an adjective, or another adverb. All right, so we said an adverb is a word that tells you about a verb, or it can tell us about an adjective, or it can actually tell us about another adverb. And when it comes to adverbs, right, then adverbs, They basically tell us how, they tell us when, or they tell us where. So we said adverbs, they tell us how, it tells us when, and it tells us where. And if we look at an example, it says Grace ran really quickly. So Grace ran really quickly. Where is the line? Under two, because two, this is an adjective, right? So it says I ate two apples. I first wrote down the number two, but then afterwards I wrote the word two. So two is, it's the word that tells us how many apples there are. Let's say, for example, we say there are 13 students watching, right? So that word 13, it tells us how many students are watching. So that is why I underlined two. All right, so now we're going to adverbs, right? Remember we said an adjective, it's a word that tells us about a noun. So it either tells us what kind of noun it is or how many of the nouns there are. But now we have an adverb, and an adverb is a word that tells you about a verb, an adjective, or another adverb. And adverbs, they often tell us either how, they tell us when, or where. And an example of an adverb is Grace ran really quickly. And the word quickly is the word that basically tells us how. Grace ran. So the word really, okay, it's actually really. So the word really tells us how quickly Grace ran. So really quickly tells us how Grace ran. And usually our adverbs, right, that tells us how, sorry, they end with ly. So most of our adverbs that tells us how, they end in ly, like quickly, hurriedly, softly. And sometimes you cannot always just use ly when it comes to adverbs, right? Because remember, adverbs, they tell us either when or they tell us where. Let's say, for example, if you look at another example, it says she arrives soon. So soon is our adverbs that tells us when she will arrive. You see, it does not end with an ly because this one soon, it tells us when she'll arrive. And then sometimes the word, once a word ends with ly, it doesn't necessarily also mean that it is an adverb. Sometimes it's describing a noun, and that is why you need to know, is it describing a noun or is it telling us more about a verb? For example, Fred has a friendly dog. And friendly that ends with ly, it tells us about the dog. It describes the dog, so which means that that is an adjective, not an adverb. All right. So this is our basically the difference between an adjective and adverb. We see an adjective, it is a word that tells us about a noun. And adjectives, they often tell us what kind or they tell us how many. And remember, when it tells us what kind, and then it's like saying, let's say, for example, whatever your sentence is, now you need to ask yourself, what kind of is that? So, what kind of, and your noun is that? And remember, your noun, it tells us about a people, it talks about places, animals, or things. So, which means the adjective, it describes, it tells us more about a person, an animal, a place, or a thing. And once again, we said an adverb is a word that tells us about a verb, it tells us about an adjective, or it tells us about another adverb. All right, so now we're going to aplusstudents.ca and we're going to choose between an adjective and we're going to choose between an adverb. So we're going to choose between adjectives and adverbs. And once again, adjectives is a word that tells us about a noun, it tells us what kind, and it tells us how many. Whereas an adverb is a word that tells us about a noun, an adjective, or another adverb. And adverbs, they often tell us how, they tell us when, or they tell us when. And usually when an adverb tells us how, or an adverb that tells us how, it ends in ly. Guys, I am going to start removing some of you because you are disturbing the others. Let us let's not even ask about anybody's birthday. Let us not even befriend each other now. Let us just focus, please. Otherwise, I'm going to start removing, I'm going to start reporting you, and we are going to directly contact your parents because some of you are not here to learn. So if I'm going to speak to one more person now again, and I'm not going to speak again, and then I'm going to report you the first time. If I report you and you're still going to continue, and then I'm going to remove you. Because there's others that are here to listen and to learn. And some of you are just here to have conversations. So I will definitely directly speak to your parents. All right. So now we're going to look at an example, right, or we're going to look at activities of either an adverb or an adjective, sorry. So we need to choose between an adjective or an adverb. And we said an adjective is a word that tells us about a noun. And adjectives, they often tell us what kind or tells us how many. And then we have an adverb, and an adverb, it tells us more about the verb. Or an adjective or another adverb, and it often tells us how, when, or where. All right, so now it says we need to choose the word that fits in the sentence. So we need to choose the word that fits in the sentence. It says the audience continued cheering as the, do we say as the, do we say remarkably performance, performers left the stage, or do we say the remarkable performer left the stage? Which one is correct? The audience continued cheering as the remarkably performers left the stage, or the remarkable performers left the stage. We need to choose a word that tells us about the performers. Is it remarkably, option one, or remarkable, option two? All right, and if we were to choose the correct option, then yes, we will choose remarkable, which is option two, right? Because remarkable, it tells us about the performers. It tells us what kind of performers left the stage. They were remarkable. The remarkable performers left the stage. That word remarkably is basically an adverb. So remarkable is correct. Well done. The next one says, we need to choose the correct word that fits in the sentence. Remember, this is now us either choosing an adverb or choosing an adjective. It says, when Beth saw Ronnie's puzzled expression, do we say she she gently teased him about it, or she gentle teased him about it? So we need to choose the correct option. Do we say that when Beth saw Ronnie's puzzled expression, she gently teased him about it, or she gentle teased him about it? All right. And if we were to choose the correct option, then yes, we will say that when Beth saw Ronnie's puzzled expression, she gently teased him about it. She gently teased him about it. And that word gently, right? It is an adverb. So well done. Gently is the adverb that tells us how she teased him. All right, let's look at the next one and then we're going to our test. It says, a number of residents have been attending the yearly holiday celebration. So, a what number of residents? We need to say a what number of residents have been attending the yearly holiday celebration? Do we say a decreasingly? Do we say a decreasingly number of residents have been attending the yearly holiday celebrations? Or do we say a decreasing number of residents have been attending the yearly holiday celebration? Which one is correct? All right. And if we were to choose the correct option, then yes, we will say a decreasing number of residents have been attending the yearly holiday celebration. So decreasing, it is an adjective. Well done. All right, so now we're going to our test where we are going to choose between an adjective or an adverb, or between adjectives and adverbs. It says Mr. Osborne, do we say merely suggested that you shouldn't proofread your emails before sending them? Or Mr. Osborne suggested Mr. Osborne mere suggested that you should proofread your emails before sending them. So option one, merely, or option two, mere. All right, and if we were to choose the correct option, we will say Mr. Osborne merely suggested that you should proofread your emails before sending them. So merely is our adverb. So adverb. So well done. Merely is correct. The next one says, when Beth saw Rani's puzzled expression, do we say she gently teased him about it, option one, or gentle teased him about it, option two? Which one is correct? Gently or gentle? Gently or gentle? And if we were to choose the correct option, then we will say she gently teased him about it. So gently, which is option one. So well done. The next one says tax increases will be discussed in a meeting open to the, do we say the general public, option one, or generally public, option two? So general public, option one, or generally public, option two? So general public, option one, or generally public, option two? Which one is correct? All right, and if we were to choose the correct option, then we will say tax increases will be discussed in a meeting open to the general public. Well done. General, option one is correct. General public. Well done. That is an adjective. All right, the next one says we need to choose the correct word that fits in the sentence. The speaker answered the question reasonably, or do we say the speaker answered the question reasonable and the audience nodded in agreement? So, option one, reasonably, or option two, reasonable. All right, then if we were to choose the correct option, we will say the speaker answered the question reasonably and the audience nodded in agreement. So well done. Reasonably is our adverb that tells us how the speaker spoke. All right, the next one says the audience continued cheering as the remarkable performance left the stage, option one, or remarkably performance left the stage, option two. Which one is correct? So option one, remarkable, or option two, remarkably. All right. And if we were to choose the correct option, then remarkable performance, it's an adjective that tells us about the performance, tells us what kind of performance. So well done. Remarkable performance. So now we're going to say, is the word an adjective or is it an adverb? And once again, we said an adjective tells us about a noun, tells us what kind, or tells us how many, whereas an adverb, it tells us more about a verb, an adjective or an adverb. And an adverb, it either tells us how, it tells us when, or it tells us where. So it says, is the word in bold either an adjective or an adverb? Karen tried on a violet gown with cap sleeves. So Karen tried on a violet gown with cap sleeves. The word violet, is that option, is that an adjective, sorry, or is it an adverb? Violet. So this word violet, it says Corin tried on a violet gown. So violet gown. The word violet, is that an adjective or is it an adverb? And if we were to choose the correct option, then we would say violet is an adjective. So violet is an adjective because it tells us about the noun, and it tells us what kind of gown. So it tells us what kind of gown. All right, so it's an adjective and it tells us what kind of noun. The next one says Jerry purchased a skirt made with unusually rough fabric. So the word rough, is it an adjective or is it an adverb? So rough fabric, is that an adjective or is it an adverb? And if we were to choose a correct option, we'll say it is an adjective because it tells us what kind of fabric, right? All right, so now we're going to our test where we're quickly going to do just two questions and then we are done. We need to say it's an adjective or an adverb. The word in bold. It says, please lock the door securely when you depart. So the word securely, is it an adjective or is it an adverb? So option one, it is an adjective, or option two, it's an adverb. All right, and if we were to choose the correct option, remember it says, please lock the doors securely when you depart. Lock the doors securely. Is it an adjective or an adverb? What are they saying they must actually do? Lock the door, which means that it is lock is the action that we must do. So which means a securely is an adverb. It tells us how you need to lock the door. All right, let's look at the last one. It says the lemonade you made from scratch is so refreshing. So the word refreshing, is it an adjective or is it option two, an adverb? Refreshing. All right, and if we were to choose the correct option, then we'll say it is an adjective. It tells us about the noun. All right, so this is the end of our lesson on adjective and adverbs. We said an adjective is a word that tells us more about the noun. It tells us what kind of noun it is, or it tells us how many of the nouns it is, right? Whereas an adverb is a word that tells us more about the verb, or an adjective or another adverb. All right. So we see that within verb, it tells us about the adverb tells us about the verb, an adjective or another adverb, and it tells us how, when, and where. All right. So this is the end of our lesson on adjectives and adverbs. Thank you very much for joining the class, and I really hope that you're going to have a good evening further. So, till next time, goodbye.